enthroned here on the planet. And it's a great, beautiful image because it's a promise that the world's not always going to be how it is. Someday it is going to be better. But then you get this phrase where it talks about how the sun and the ocean and different things have passed away. And for the most part, the Bible is very metaphorical. It's full of images. Is there really going to be no sun? I don't know. Is there really going to be no ocean? I don't know. But one thing it says is that we don't need those things because now God will be our light. He'll be our sun. Amen. And again, you look at this and there's things that you can say, is that real? Is it not real? I don't know. But it's pretty clear that God is going to be enthroned on this planet and that he's going to live with us again. So I don't think it's telling us that God is going to just be the sun out in the sky just watching us. And I think it's just a little weird. But I think what it's trying to tell us is if you go back to these metaphors, like this Bible was written to people who are mostly farmers. And they value the sun, they value water because that's what keeps them alive. If you don't have sunlight, you die. If you don't have water, you die. And God is saying, when things go back to the way that they were supposed to be, and I make this world like new, I will be providing for you again. You don't have to worry about if it's going to rain. You don't have to worry about the sunlight. You don't have to worry about feeding and fighting every day. I'm going to take care of you again. And so I bring this up because there are a lot of us in this room who are in that place where tonight we're going to have a hard time sleeping because we're not sure how we're going to eat tomorrow or maybe the next week. And I just want you to know that the God that we follow is doing something about it. And we have a promise that even though tomorrow might still be hard and today's going to be hard, someday it won't be anymore. And God is doing something. But, like we've been talking about, God is the only one who can fix things completely. We live in a world that's saying the world is unjust and we shouldn't be sleeping until we've fixed it all. And the reality is we can't fix it all. And that's a burden that they're putting on our shoulders that's unfair because we can't fix this. That's why we're here. That's why we're followers of Jesus, because he's promised to have fixed something that we can't fix. And we can't rid the world of injustice. Only God can do that. But he has asked us in this time right now between the cross and between the time when this promise is finished to say, come into this with me. Bring justice into this world in just the little pieces that you can. And so with this, knowing that poverty is a lot bigger than just money, knowing that poverty was never supposed to be a part of this world, and clinging to the promise that someday it won't be like this anymore, let's spend this ending last part just talking about how can we, as the people of God, enter into this mission and do something about it. We can't fix it, but there is something that all of us can be doing in our lives to bring God's justice and peace and love into this world. And so to begin this conversation, I just want to start by saying a lot of what we need to be doing is already happening in this church, and it's amazing. Every single week, I hear stories from the families in this church and the way that they are struggling. And every week, I hear stories of how other families in this church are doing things about it. Whether it's making meals or providing support and all sorts of different things. This community, this church, you are participating in the mission of God, and it is beautiful. It's amazing. And I hope that you can be encouraged knowing that we have a tough job to do, but we are doing it. And that's amazing. Amen. It is awesome. But God is calling us. The point is, God is calling us to do something. And there's 3 ways we can think about solving poverty. So first of all, when the Bible talks about poverty, there are the usual suspects, if you will. It talks about widows. It talks about orphans. It talks about immigrants. It talks about a whole class of people that Christians should be caring for, that the people of God should be caring for. And you ask, why these people? Well, these were people who couldn't provide for themselves in society. You think of widows. Women weren't really allowed to work at the time that most of this was written. So if your husband was gone and you had already left your family, you couldn't provide for yourself if someone didn't provide for you. And the same thing was true of orphans. It's hard enough to feed your own kids. And so when people would lose their family as children, they couldn't work yet. They were vulnerable to death and starvation and all sorts of just a terrible life because they didn't care for themselves. Immigrants was the same thing. For the most part, people didn't just move around like they do today. Like, what? I really like the mountains. Let's go move over there. A lot of times when you had immigrants, it's because one nation would conquer another, and people didn't want to be enslaved. They didn't want to be captured by this new ruling order, and they'd run. And so they'd have to abandon everything they had and start over. And life wasn't that easy. You couldn't just get a job at Starbucks and start over. Like, these were people who couldn't provide for themselves. There's people who couldn't care for themselves. And God's saying, I know life is hard. I know that each day is a struggle for you, but there are people in this world who have it harder and they need help. And so the Bible is calling us to be neighbors. We can't fix all injustice, but all of us have people in our life who struggle to provide for themselves, who can't get on their feet, who can't hold down a job, who for whatever reason just can't provide for themselves, and they just need help. And we're to be on the lookout for these people in our lives because they're there. And when you talk to people about poverty, I have a friend, he works in Cambodia. He works with some of the most impoverished people in the whole world. And he says, there are times where it really is, we just need money because we just need to feed these people. Like, if you're hungry, it's really hard to grow and get out of poverty when you're not eating. And there's times we need to just feed them. And that's what we call relief. It's just giving money. It's making sure that, and I know I keep talking about food. There's all sorts of different types of poverty and things, but food is the most basic. And there are people who really aren't eating. And that was his example. Really, people he's dealing with who just aren't eating. And that's what we call relief. Whether it's giving money, whether it's giving food, whether it's giving clothes, whatever, they just need relief because they're in the hole right now and they just need help. But that's not the whole story. The biggest part is what we call development. And it's helping people get education. It's helping people get jobs and careers and find ways to get into the system so they can get on their feet and provide for themselves. Because when you just simply give people money, when you just simply give and say, oh, don't worry, I can take care of you, you rob people of their dignity. It's saying, I'm going to help you because you can't make it without me. Which sometimes people do need help, but we can't stay there. It's about saying, you're a human. And God made you in his image just like me. How can I help you get on your feet so that you can live your own life, so you can care for yourself and care for others? That's what we call development. And then third, you'll hear people talk about reform, where it's just recognizing how systems can make it difficult to get on your feet. And this is the harder one, I think, for Christians to really fix. This is where we start getting to some of the things where it's like, I think only God can fix that, which for the most part is probably true, but it can't be an excuse. And that if Christians do see that there are systems in our world, if there are obstacles in a world that are keeping people from being able to care for themselves, and we can do something about it, we should. And so, poverty is a complicated issue. And if anything, leave knowing that God's doing something about it. If you're in that place, know God knows, he cares, and at some point the world's not going to be this way. But I'm also asking you, as we enter into this mission with God to bring justice to the world, that you keep your eyes open. Who in your little circle needs a meal? Who in your circle just needs some words of encouragement? Who in your circle just needs help writing that resume? Or have you ever thought about this kind of job, or whatever it is, to where they can care for themselves? And I don't know what that is for you, because for all of us it's going to be different, because we're all surrounded by different people. But all I'm asking is take off the burden of needing to fix the whole thing, that you need to fund the whole thing, and just who in my circle can't get on their feet? Who in my circle can't get in the system? Who in my circle is fighting and they're not winning? And how can I fight for them? And so to get really practical, as your church, Crossroads, we're trying to help you get started in this. What can I do with my hands and feet right now? Because in real life, if we don't have something to do next step, it goes, because life is hard. And so we have options. In terms of relief, Crossroads as a church tries to provide relief to people who are hurting, who are in trouble, in the hole, whatever it is. And we do this through our benevolence fund. It's an extra offering when you give that goes to a fund that is specifically for people and families who are in a time of need. And that's an option. But that's more in the relief category, which is fine. People in this world need relief. But now we're beginning this new initiative, this new partnership where we want to focus more on development. And so there is a city, a town in Guatemala that there is a organization called Compassion International who is asking Crossroads to sponsor not just some children or some families, but end up sponsoring this entire community. And they're asking for money, not just to say, here's money, or to just say, here's some food, we'll feed you for the rest of your life. But Compassion International's goal is to help this entire community get up on their feet, build their own churches, build their own careers, and they're inviting us to help with this. And so I don't know how the process works. I don't know how we chose this town in Guatemala. But if you would like to sponsor one of these child to help this town in poverty, then out in the lobby, we have cards on the tables. You can ask me, you can ask someone with a name tag for these links to give to this town to help support this initiative to provide community development in Guatemala. And so, poverty is a tough issue. It affects all of us, whether we see it or not, whether we choose to see it or not. But I want to leave you with the promise that God is doing something about it. And that the work we're doing here in this church, it's good work. And so I encourage you, keep doing the good work you're doing. We can't fix this problem, but we are making a difference. And what we're doing is important. So thank you. Let's end in prayer because this is a lot easier to say than to do. Dear God, thank you so much for your mercy that in this hard world, you are not just watching us from afar. You have not just abandoned us, but you are present in our real lives. That you see the ways that we need to fight to make it each day, and you give us strength to do things we couldn't do without you. You bless us with friends. You bless us with support. You bless us with your church. We ask, God, that you can continue to be with us, that you can fill us with your Spirit so that we can build your kingdom in a way that we couldn't do without you, God. And we thank you for this community, this church that you've given us, full of people who support us, who encourage us, and who love us, God. Be with us this week as we struggle to be your people. Provide for us, God, as we do our best to provide for others. May our comfort be in knowing that you sustain us, you love us, and you save us. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're going to move into communion now. So if you haven't grabbed a cup in the back, feel free to do so. And the reason why we do this is because it's about remembrance. It's remembering that Jesus is our Savior. And those aren't just words, but he put his money where his mouth is. And when push came to shove, he died for us. And that death shows us that he is with us in this pain. He is not watching afar, but he is active. That he loves us, that we are worth saving. Don't ever let this world tell you you're not worth saving. And so in this time, I want to invite you to just spend time with God, to commune with him, to remember that his body was broken, that his blood was shed to save you. And that's not just metaphorical. He is really going to save you. And so in this time, maybe it's a time of thanksgiving. Maybe it's a time of, God, I don't feel like I'm being saved right now. Maybe it's a time of just being in his arms, being in his presence. But I invite you to please commune with Jesus. Remember that he loves you and he saves you. And so when you're ready, eat and remember, drink and remember. Well, hello, everyone. Hi. So my boss is here today. So as we get started, if anything's slightly funny, laugh a little bit louder. If anything's just slightly profound, ooh, I'd really appreciate that. But seriously, my name is Pastor Alex. And over the last few weeks, we've been going through this series, getting into God's Word and talking about justice. And we're going to continue on this week doing that same thing and moving forward. And again, it's because as the church, we are deeply convicted that we are supposed to be people who are experts in justice because we follow a good God, the God who is the author of goodness and justice. And the world is really confused about justice. And it's what we're talking about a lot. So, we're not here to talk about politics. We're here to worship God. But we worship a God of justice, and that's what we're continuing doing today. And so there's a couple things as we move into this week that I just want to say before we really jump into this. And it's just setting that framework. One, it's remembering that we talk about God as a God who is a judge and a God of justice, but often that's characterized as God being someone who just likes to punish us. That's the biblical vision of justice, and that's not the biblical version of justice. It's not just we do bad things and God punishes us, but that's a gross picture of who God is. But rather, the emphasis I really want to leave us with is the fact that God cares about the pain. He cares about injustice. He cares about what we're going through, and he's not just in a cloud watching, but he's actually doing something about it. And that's why this whole series is just so important, because it's not just about, do we actually know what justice is? But it's remembering that ultimately this is God's work. It's work that he cares about, and it's real life stuff. And it's important that we know that God's with us. And so, as we're talking about justice, there's two parts. It's not God punishes us because he's mad at us. No, rather that it's the first part is just acknowledging that something's been done wrong. Because a lot of us, we've been hurt and we've been scarred, and the people that hurt us don't even think they did anything wrong. They won't even admit they did anything wrong, and we've all been in that place, and it's hard. And it's not about punishment. It's just, let's get on the same page. We've hurt each other, and we've been hurt, and it's just acknowledging that we've been wronged and that we've wronged others. But God, he's not just about punishment. I know I keep saying it because it's important. That's not what it's all about. But it's about making things right. Because the world isn't how it was supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to be this way, but it is this way. And because God loves us, because he's merciful, and he hasn't just abandoned us, the goal is to make things right. And so with that, This week, we're moving into our next topic, which is poverty, which is a little different than some other aspects of justice that I think we normally talk about. When we think of justice, we keep talking about, if a guy wrecks our car, we don't just want him to be punished. We don't just want him sent to jail because at the end of the day, it doesn't help us. We still have a broken car, right? What we really want is we just want our car to be fixed so we can get back to normal life, so we can get back to what we were doing and things can back to how they were. But in that situation, there's someone that we can point to. They wrecked my car. They need to fix it. They're the ones who caused this injustice. Where poverty, there are some people in the world that I think that they'll say, yeah, there's certain people we can point to that are the cause of poverty in our world. But for the most part, I don't know that that's necessarily true. And in some ways, when we think of poverty, we don't necessarily think of people being wronged. But the reason why the Bible talks about it as injustice goes back to this idea of the world isn't how it's supposed to be. There wasn't supposed to be poverty. And so the Bible, as it's talking about poverty, this isn't just a conversation about money. So before we really dive into what I want to talk about, I just want to make sure we're on the same page about that poverty isn't necessarily just about money. I'd say there's a difference between being broke and being poor. I remember when I was in college, me and all my friends, we were broke most of the time, but we weren't poor. We weren't in poverty. I may not have had much of my paycheck left after Monday or Tuesday, but I knew another one was coming on Friday. I ate that night. I knew I was going to eat the next night. I knew where I was going to be sleeping. I wasn't poor. I wasn't in poverty, but I might have been broke. And so we're not talking about just being broke. Now, yes, when we talk about poverty, money is a part of it, but don't get stuck just on money. We're talking about something deeper. So, with that said, I want to get started in Genesis 1. And you're thinking, why are we going there again? But it goes back to this idea that the world isn't how it's supposed to be. And in these few little lines, we have this little tiny glimpse in like a page and a half of how the world was supposed to be, because it was that way for a little tiny bit. And so if we're going to talk about how the world should be, we have to understand how it was before it all got unraveled, before it all got broken. And so if you're following along, or if you haven't memorized now, it's Genesis 1 starting in verse 26. And it's just God saying, "And then he said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.' So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth.'" So we've talked about this every week, and we've gone deeper and deeper into how this helps inform us of how the world was supposed to be and of what justice is and how to be people who are a part of God's mission. And we've focused mainly in verse 27 and what it means to be made in the image of God. But now to go deeper still into this, we're going to really be looking at what's going on 28. So God creates humanity. He says we're in his image, but then he gives us the very first command that he has for us. And it's to be fruitful and to multiply. Fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish of sea, birds, everything on the ground, right? And this is what I think we really need to start with to understand why poverty is an injustice, how we can understand God's thoughts on poverty, and how we can enter into God's mission as we do something about poverty. And so, again, this is how the world was supposed to be. So he starts with saying to the very first family, be fruitful and multiply. And you can all giggle now, right? Be fruitful and multiply. And that's definitely a part of what's going on in this passage. But again, it's just kind of a little shallow reading of this. And there's a lot here that goes even deeper, especially when he's connecting it to rule and subdue, have dominion over the earth. Like it's very Bible-y. Who said dominion this week? Right? What does that even mean? But what God here is saying is he just created this world. He created humanity, and he said, man, this is all very good. And he's tasked us with caring for this world. And the world is good, but he knows that with us in it, tending to it, the way that God tends to things, that we can make it even better. And the great image for this that I've always enjoyed is the image of a garden. And you'll notice the very next story is the first family in a garden. I don't garden, I'm just trusting people who do, but I know some of you have gardens, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't just throw seeds out there and all of a sudden you have a beautiful garden, right? Video games tell me you just plant seeds and water it and then you have a garden, but that's not true either. You have to tend to the ground. And then you put seeds in, and you have to care for them, and you have to weed it, and you have to protect it from squirrels, and it's a whole process. But when we do this, when we tend to the ground and we tend to these seeds, the earth will do something that it couldn't have done without us. And now you think, well, you can still grow things if we don't do anything. That's sure. Some of my favorite hikes in the world, you come across wild raspberry bushes, and it's cool because there's little raspberries. But the thing is, when humans come and we build groves and we build orchards, we can make the world produce food and yield fruit in a way that it never could without us. We come to this good world and we make it better. And to get out of the gardening example, look at these guitars. They're made of wood, they're made of metal, nylon, plastic. There's a ton of stuff there. Humans went into the world, pulled stuff out, and we make fine instruments. And God is saying, that's good. Rule and subdue the world. He's saying, go into family, be fruitful, multiply. Like when it comes to humanity, we're not like other animals. The classic example is rabbits, right? We're all adults. You put a boy rabbit, a girl rabbit, all of a sudden there's a bunch of rabbits. You do this with other animals, same things. But when you put a male human and a female human together, I know it feels like it sometimes around 12 or 11 here when there's just a bunch of humans running all over the place, but it's different. When humans come together, there's just not more humans. You have a family. And your families get bigger and bigger. And before you know it, you have families here and here and here. And we build community. We build towns. We build civilization. And that's what God is saying. He's saying, be fruitful, multiply, build families, come into community, go into the world and make it better. Like when you sit down with your best friends and your family and you talk, it's fun and it's good, you enjoy it. And then someone brings a guitar, they bring the wine, they bring the food, it's even better. It's not that it wasn't good beforehand, but it gets better. And God gave us this gift to make the world better through family and through just the ways that we can go into the world and just harvest it and make it better. And this is a beautiful picture of how the world is supposed to be. But humans, tending the first garden, we know how the story goes. God says, be fruitful, multiply, live in this awesome world, make it better, build family, build civilization. And they say, man, God, your way of doing things is fine, but we want to do things our way. We think we could do even better if we do things our way. And the next page, the world is burning. The first family has the first murder. And now, God comes and he says, you've chosen your order over mine. And we talked about the first week, how when humans decide to let evil into this world, God looks at a serpent, which I know it's a talking serpent. Don't let that distract you right now. But God looks in the face of the embodiment of all evil, and he says, I will kill you. He says, I will crush your head. I will destroy you. And we talked about that someday God is going to do something about evil. But then he looks at humanity, and he looks at Eve, and he talks about how childbearing is going to be rough now, which that's a whole wormhole let's not let that distract us. And then he looks at Adam and he says, because of what you've done, because you listened to Eve and ate the food that you shouldn't have eaten, and husbands, the Bible's not saying don't listen to your wives, sorry. That's not what it's saying. But he's saying that even though this wasn't your idea, Adam, you failed and you're still culpable. And evil still entered this world. And he makes this comment. He says, because of you, the ground is cursed, and you will work it by the sweat of your brow for the rest of your days. Think before this. Human was tasked with just make the world better. Build families. Go and build guitars. Tend to this garden. Have food. Make the world better. You can eat of anything in this garden. God is saying, make the world better and I'll take care of you. Rule and subdue, and you don't have to worry about food. And Adam and Eve say, actually, we think we can even do better than God's order. And now, today, some of us are going to go to bed and we're going to sleep soundly because we had a good dinner, and tomorrow we know we're going to have another one. But tonight, some of us are going to go to bed and we're not going to sleep very well because we didn't eat today and we're not sure about tomorrow's meal. Because evil has entered this world, because humans have taken rulership on themselves and taken it from God, we now live in a world where we need to fight to survive. And I don't know that we could say that before the fall that life was fair, but it very clearly is not fair now. And it's not necessarily anyone's fault, but at the end of the day, life is hard now. And for some of us, it's easier. For some of it, it's harder. But all of us live in a world where we have to fight to survive. And that's poverty. And it's an image of the world, how it's not supposed to be. And God is saying, this is not good. And this is something that he's working on right now. And it's something that he's calling the church to do something about. But the story goes on, and we don't have time to go through the whole thing, but you get to the end. And I don't want to spend too much time in Revelation because it turns into just a whole separate thing. But these are passages that I've spent a lot of my life thinking about. Before I had this job, I worked in a warehouse for 10 years, and it was hard work. And I was surrounded by people who spent 20 to 30 years working in this place. And I watched how they fight to survive every day of their life for decades. And how this hard work had just damaged their bodies, how it would sometimes affect their self-work. And it just made it so plain to me how real this is. That we work by the sweat of our brow for food every day, for happiness each day, to just work each day, to enjoy life each day. Like, this is real. And I got to see that this isn't good. The world could be better. And God, what are you doing about this? And there's a spot in Revelation 22, and it's talking about God making things right. And you have this image where God is now the sole ruler of the world. That the way he wants the world to be is the way it's going to be now. And he's sitting